sturdy, the frequency. The coffee was spinning itself into a vortex, and Emily's eyes, twin points of sapphire light, had burned through the fear into something else entirely. She was smiling. It was the smile of something that had been caged for 35 years and had finally learned the key was inside her all along. Then she understood what her father had done. Not to protect Boise, to protect them from her. 13 hours earlier, the rain had been merciless. The silver Toyota Corolla cut through the parking lot like a knife through dark water, tires catching the glossy asphalt. The yellow street lamps smeared across the windshield in bleeding washes of sodium light. Emily's hands ached from gripping the steering wheel for 6 hours. 6 hours of late-night radio, 300 miles of callers asking about their problems, their lives, their small, manageable sorrows. She had nodded at the microphone like a confessor, her voice even and measured, the instrument that kept people sane. The engine died with a click. The rain continued its assault. Wind shear patterns on the glass, red brake light glow reflecting back at her exhausted face. She sat there for a moment, shoulders slumped, the weight of the shift pooling in her lower back. The wipers thumped their rhythm, on, off, each cycle sweeping away nothing. She kicked open the driver's side door and stumbled into the downpour. The apartment building swallowed her. She was reaching for her keys when her boot caught something. A hard edge. She looked down, and the world tilted sideways. A black VHS tape. No sleeve, no label. Just black plastic and the faint sheen of magnetic tape visible through the cracks. Next to it, a yellow Post-it note, folded twice. Emily's fingers were trembling. From cold, from exhaustion, from something her body recognized before her mind did. She peeled the note back. The handwriting was frantic, the ink bleeding into the paper, as if written in a state of psychological collapse. Listen to the silence. He left behind. The key went in. The lock turned. She pushed through into her apartment, the tape in one hand, the note in the other, rain dripping onto the gray carpet in a steady, methodical pattern. The vintage Sony VCR sat on a shelf next to the television, a relic from college, never thrown away because Emily lived the way people did in the 1980s without meaning to. Saving things, keeping equipment, suspicious of streaming services. She pushed the tape in. The machine whirred, clacked, the mechanical protest of old technology waking up from hibernation. She sat on the edge of her corduroy sofa. The television flickered. Static, white noise, blue light bleeding into the dark room, the same blue that had bathed her childhood living room when her father would disappear into the basement with his equipment, the sound of his work trickling up through the floorboards like something alive and hungry. The picture stabilized. A man, wire-rimmed glasses, a lab coat pressed and perfect. He sat at a desk, and Emily could read the nameplate from across the room. Dr. Arthur Vance. Her father, older than she remembered him. The lines around his eyes deeper, the mouth set in a clinical expression she knew too well. He leaned forward. The VHS camera captured the reflection of his eyes, pinpricks of light in the lens. His voice was a gravelly whisper. September 12th, 1984. Subject Alpha is responding to the frequency. He paused. His hands were folded on the desk, perfectly still. The Boise Collective is established. The children of Sycamore Street don't know they are my choir. The screen cut to black. Emily sat in the darkness for what felt like hours. The clock on the wall read 3:47 a.m. She hadn't moved. She hadn't breathed. Or if she had, she hadn't noticed the motion of her own lungs, the expansion and contraction of her rib cage, the simple fact of her continued existence. Choir, children, frequency. She reached for her phone. The next morning broke cold and clear, the sun too bright for eyes that hadn't closed. Emily sat in her car 3 blocks from her childhood home, studying a Polaroid from 1986. The same house, cleaner then, white picket fence, hedges trimmed into perfect geometrical shapes. The image was fading, the colors shifting toward the sepia tones of ancient memory. Now the hedges were overgrown. The fence had collapsed in places. The house held the look of something that had been abandoned, then forgotten, then abandoned again. She pulled up to the curb. Mr. Henderson's door opened exactly 6 inches. He was smaller than Emily remembered, shrunken somehow, as if fear had been drying him out from the inside for 30 years. The moth-eaten sweater hung on him like a costume designed for a different body. His eyes darted again. His fingers were wrapped around a spray bottle filled with blue liquid. Windex, Emily registered, though the obsessive grip suggested it was being held as a weapon. Yes? His voice cracked. The word emerged as barely more than a whisper. Mr. Henderson, I'm Emily Vance. I live 2 streets over. His eye twitched. I need to ask you about something. From 1986, there was a group of children. They were... She held up a printout. Her father's face. The same face from the VHS, younger, smiling, holding a clipboard in what appeared to be a basement laboratory. The effect was instantaneous. Mr. Henderson's eyes glazed. His pupils expanded, swallowing the iris. His mouth opened, not in speech, but in something else. A sound began low in his throat. A humming, a rhythm. 3 notes repeating mm-mm-mm. His body began to sway, a metronome without conviction. The static is loud today, Arthur, he whispered, his voice hollow and channeled, as if speaking through a medium. The static is loud today. Emily stepped back. The door swung open wider. Henderson's hand was still gripping the spray bottle, but now it was trembling so violently the blue liquid sloshed against the plastic. The frequency is off, he continued, his gaze passing through her completely, seeing nothing, seeing past everything. You aren't supposed to be here. He buried the trigger, then his palm came up. Fast, the heel of his hand connected with the wooden doorframe, and the impact sent splintering vibrations through the porch. The trigger, he said again, his voice cracking into something animal. He buried the trigger in her. Emily's hand moved to her neck of its own accord. There, a small lump, hard, pea-sized, subcutaneous. She had never thought about it before. It had always been there. Since childhood, she supposed, though she couldn't remember being conscious of it being placed, being installed, being added to her. Her fingers pressed against it. A ringing sound filled her ears, high-pitched, insistent, the kind of frequency that makes the bones vibrate. Henderson's humming intensified. Emily turned and ran. The street was quiet. Boise on a Sunday morning, the neighborhood moving at its own drowsy pace. She was at her car when the sound came. Tires meeting asphalt at high velocity. Not a normal arrival, a tactical approach. The black Tahoe materialized from the intersection, momentum carrying it into a blocking position. Door opened before the vehicle had fully stopped. A man emerged. Gray windbreaker, tactical boots, the kind of posture that belonged to someone trained in extraction and control. Emily's survival instinct screamed. She ran. His hand found her arm. The grip was professional. Pressure points calculated to immobilize without injuring. But Emily had worked retail. She had dealt with difficult callers. She had learned that the body has languages other than reason. She twisted into the grip rather than away from it. The man's arm lock broke. Her elbow came up and connected with his solar plexus. He gasped. The grip loosened. A second man was already moving. from the driver's side, closing the distance with the mechanical efficiency of a machine. Emily grabbed the nearest thing, her VCR tape, still in her bag from the car, and swung it like a hammer into the first man's temple. The contact was solid. Blood bloomed on his forehead, a cut opening like a third eye. He staggered back, and Emily saw the second man reaching for something, not a gun, but something else. Something in his jacket. And that's when she made her choice. She dove into the car, keys, fumbling. The second man's hand was already at the window, reaching through the half-open frame, fingers curling like grasping roots. Emily threw the car into reverse and felt the satisfying resistance of the door mechanism catching his arm. He fell. His body tumbled across the driveway with a sickening thud that Emily watched in the rearview mirror. The engine roared. She hit the gas and felt the car fishtail, the tires seeking traction on wet pavement. Behind her, the two men stood in the street, perfectly still, watching her leave. Not chasing, not following, just watching, observing, cataloging her trajectory for some larger purpose. The rearview mirror showed them getting smaller, disappearing into the distance, like two figures in a hallucination resolving back into waking. The radio station was a squat concrete building on the edge of downtown. K-Boy, the sign read, though the O was flickering, winking on and off like a nervous eye. Emily drove past the main entrance and pulled into the employee lot. She sat in the car for 5 minutes, then she got out. The after-hours entrance accepted her key card. She climbed the stairs and pushed through the studio door. The soundboard was a constellation of red and green LEDs, all of them reflecting in the lenses of her glasses. She was alone. The red on-air light was dark. The booth was hers. She connected the VHS player to the oscilloscope using an XLR cable she found in the equipment closet. The audio waveform appeared on screen, a jagged mountain range of frequencies, beautiful and terrible and completely incomprehensible. She began isolating the background tones. Hour after hour, the tape played. Her father's voice droned on. Clinical observations, dates, reference numbers, the language of science applied to something that wasn't science at all. And underneath it, a sound, a throb, a pulse, something subsonic. She increased the gain. The pulse became a rhythm. The rhythm became a song. Her nose began to bleed, just a drop at first, landing on the white fader like a red period at the end of a sentence. She didn't wipe it away. She kept working. The frequency isolated. She fed it through the speakers at barely audible levels. And then her father's voice changed. The tape distorted, the audio becoming something neither recorded nor broadcast. Something that seemed to exist outside normal physics. Emily, if you are hearing this, the song is almost finished. She grabbed the headphones. Her father was speaking directly into her ears. Speaking through the machinery, speaking through the tape itself as if it was his voice encoded into the magnetic particles. You were the conductor. The word alpha began blinking on the screen, repeating, hypnotic, a visual rhythm matching the audio pulse. She reached for the fader to turn it off, to stop the madness, but her hand wouldn't obey. The trigger wasn't a word, Emily. It was you. Your voice carries the override. Behind her, a sound. The studio door swinging open. Mark, her station manager. His eyes were glazed, exactly like Henderson's. Exactly like something had reached into his skull and rewired his autonomic nervous system. He was holding a fire extinguisher, not casually, with intention. Emily grabbed her laptop. She grabbed the VHS tape. She didn't think, she simply moved, her body obeying the ancient imperative, survive. She lunged for the back exit. The fire extinguisher came down where she had been standing a half-second before, shattering the mixing board, spraying glass across the studio floor like diamonds made of danger. The fire escape was rust and cold metal, and the feeling of her own mortality becoming increasingly concrete. Emily climbed, her fingers seeking purchase on the grating, each step a clang that echoed through the alley below. Behind her, footsteps, heavy, methodical. She reached the top of the ladder and pulled herself onto the roof. The fog was rolling in from the valley, the moon obscured to nothing, just a pale suggestion of light behind the clouds. She was running across gravel when the security guard emerged from the stairwell. He didn't look at her. He simply moved. An expandable baton was drawn with a metallic click, the sound of a mechanism calibrated for violence. He crossed the roof toward her with the mechanical precision of something that wasn't quite human anymore. Or if it was, had had something essential removed. Emily kicked. His knee buckled slightly, should have buckled more, should have sent him down. But he barely flinched. She grabbed his tie, using it as a lever to pull his head downward, toward the metal railing. She heard the connection, metal on bone, a sound like a tuning fork struck and left ringing. He fell. She didn't wait to see if he got up. Mark was at the top of the ladder now, his head emerging like something being birthed from the roof itself. Emily ran. The adjacent building was 4 feet away. She jumped, felt the terrible moment of suspension, where gravity hadn't quite caught up with her trajectory. And then she was landing hard on a gravel roof, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. She rolled. She came up running. Behind her, she heard Mark attempting the jump. A scuffle. The sound of him making the crossing. She ran past an HVAC unit and crouched behind it. The night was alive with footsteps. Not just Mark's, others. Citizens of Boise moving with the same synchronized cadence. They were walking in perfect rows below, their heads tilted upward, searching the roofs with the patience of hunters who knew their prey couldn't escape. The neighborhood was waking up. The frequency. That's what her father had meant. His voice wasn't contained in the tape or the radio or even the lump in her neck. It was broadcast through Boise itself. It was infrastructure. It was architecture. It was the foundation upon which the entire town was built. She had to go deeper. The childhood home still stood on Elm Street, the place where she had grown up between ages 5 and 12, before her father had disappeared and her mother had moved them to the suburbs. The windows were boarded with plywood. The lawn had gone to seed. The mailbox hung off its post like a broken neck. Emily found a tire iron in an abandoned construction site 2 blocks away. She returned and pried the plywood from the front window. The wood groaned and splintered. She crawled through, the beam of her flashlight cutting through dust so thick it seemed sentient. The interior was frozen in 1989, the year everything had stopped. Family photographs on the mantel, a television guide from August, floral wallpaper peeling in long, diseased strips. She made her way to the basement stairs. Each step creaked. The darkness below was profound, the kind of black that only exists in places where light has been deliberately excluded. At the bottom, she found a workbench covered in rusted scalpels and soldering irons. A child's drawing was taped to the wall. A sun, crudely rendered in crayon, its rays extending outward like the spokes of a wheel. She didn't remember drawing it. The workbench had a backing wall of shelves. Books, mostly. Medical texts, engineering manuals, audio equipment repair guides. Emily pushed against the bookshelf. It slid sideways on hidden tracks, a mechanism designed for concealment, revealing a soundproofed chamber. The walls were lined with egg carton foam, the texture reminding her of something she had suppressed for decades. Small fingers running across the foam, and her father's voice saying, Try again, Emily. You can do better. A reel-to-reel tape machine sat on a metal desk. Next to it, file folders. She grabbed one labeled Subject Alpha, Trigger Protocols. Inside was a birth certificate, her name. But the date of birth was August 12th, 1978, not 1983, 1978. Beneath the birth certificate was a clinical photograph, a newborn, tiny, connected to machines, and stamped across the top in red ink, Experimental Subject Suwada 1, Neural Implant Installation. Emily's legs gave out. She sank to the floor as a CRT monitor flickered to life on the desk. The screen showed a security camera feed, the street outside her childhood home. A dozen neighbors stood in a perfect circle around her silver Corolla, their faces tilted upward toward the house. The lump in her neck began to throb. It was sending them. It was the antenna. She was the transmitter. And they were the broadcast. They emerged from the house like components of a machine, moving with synchronized precision. Emily burst through the front door, swinging the tire iron, and they didn't scream or run or show any sign of self-preservation. They simply walked toward her, arms outstretched, fingers grasping, like puppets on invisible strings. Mrs. Gable, her childhood babysitter, grabbed Emily's hair. The pain was electric and immediate. Emily screamed and swung the tire iron in a savage arc that connected with Mrs. Gable's ribs. The woman grunted, but didn't release her grip. Emily swung again, until the fingers loosened and Mrs. Gable fell to her knees, her eyes still glazed, still humming. More came. 3 men tackled Emily into the mud. She bit someone's hand, tasted salt and dirt and something metallic, and used her legs to piston kick upward. One of them fell. She scrambled up, covered in mud, her clothes torn, rain mixing with sweat. The neighbors began to hum. The sound was layered. Dozens of voices, all singing the same 3-note melody, building into something that felt physical. Something that could be held in the hands and thrown like a weapon. Emily fell to her knees, clutching her ears. The lump in her neck began to glow. A sickly blue light that pulsed with her heartbeat, growing brighter with each repetition. The glow was visible beneath the skin, a bioluminescent tumor. A receiver tuned to frequencies below human hearing, the black SUV pulled up to the curb. The door opened. A man stepped out. Expensive suit. The kind of face that appeared in old photographs, the kind of face that supervised experiments, made decisions about human subjects, and slept perfectly well at night. Dr. Aris. He held a remote control. His thumb was positioned over a red button. The world went black. The eyes opened to harsh fluorescent light, and the sensation of leather straps biting into the wrists. Emily was in a chair. Medical, white, the kind used for dental procedures or interrogations, or both. Above her head, a circular surgical light created a perfect void. A white circle so intense it created afterimages. She was strapped down. Her wrists, her ankles. A halo device locked around her head, preventing any rotation, any movement, forcing her to stare upward into the light. "Welcome back, Subject Alpha," a voice said. Dr. Aris stepped into her field of vision. He was holding a tablet. He swiped through images. Emily at her apartment window, Emily at the radio station, Emily eating alone in her kitchen, all of them taken from hidden angles, all of them invasive, all of them evidence of a surveillance so complete it negated the possibility of privacy itself. "Your father was a visionary," Aris continued, his voice clinical, devoid of emotion. He understood what others couldn't, that individual consciousness is a luxury the group can't afford. He turned the tablet around. A video began playing. A 10-year-old Emily, younger than her first clear memories. She was standing in a circle with other children, but the other children were convulsing, seizing, their bodies contorting with the kind of agony that should have been lethal. And from Emily's mouth came a sound, a frequency that distorted the video feed itself, causing the image to warp and glitch. "Your father didn't protect the neighborhood from the experiment," Aris said quietly. "He used your voice to keep them in a mental cage so they wouldn't hurt you." Emily looked at the mirror on the wall. She could see her reflection, and she could see the lump in her neck, glowing softly, pulsing with its own rhythm. "You are the central antenna," Aris said. "Your vocal cords produce a frequency that, when broadcast through the transmitter embedded in your neck, creates a harmonic resonance that keeps the entire neighborhood in a state of controlled cognition. They remain conscious enough to function, conscious enough to maintain employment, conscious enough to appear normal, but not conscious enough to realize what they've become." He picked up a syringe. The needle was long. The serum inside was blue. "Time for a factory reset, Emily," he said. "Broadus, hold her head." A second man materialized, the one from the alley. His temple was still bleeding from where the VHS tape had connected. He placed his hands on either side of Emily's head and pressed down, ensuring the halo device did its job. The needle approached. Emily's head was locked into the metal brace. She couldn't turn away. She watched as Aris drew the blue serum from a vial labeled Amnesia V2. He fitted the needle with clinical precision. The point was sharp. The liquid inside was viscous, moving slowly through the barrel as he prepared the injection. "What was your father's last name?" Aris asked casually, as if making conversation. "Vance," Emily whispered. "And your mother's?" "Kathleen." "And do you remember your first day of school?" She didn't answer. "That's fine. You won't remember any of it soon. When you wake up, Boise will be a city full of strangers. Your apartment will be foreign to you. The radio station will be a place you've never worked. We'll give you a different life, a better life, a simpler one." Aris pressed the needle against the lump in her neck. The skin indented. Emily looked across the room. The VHS tape lay on the steel table. It was the only truth she had, and now it was out of reach. Tears began to form at the corners of her eyes, tracking through the mud that was still caked on her face. "Your father was terrified," Aris continued, his voice almost gentle. "He discovered what you were capable of. And so he built this whole mechanism, this entire city, as a cage for you." The needle pressed deeper. But Emily was thinking about the radio station. She was thinking about the oscilloscope and the isolated frequencies and the way her voice, when calibrated to the exact resonance of the broadcast equipment, could shatter glass and boil blood and shred the neural pathways of every conditioned subject simultaneously. She opened her mouth. She didn't scream. She hummed. It was the lullaby. It was the three-note melody. But she pitched it perfectly. The frequency she had isolated in the tape, but inverted, reversed, made into something that would destroy rather than control. Her vocal cords vibrated at a level that shouldn't have been physically possible, a resonance that required the assistance of the very implant in her neck. The needle in Aris's hand began to vibrate. The blue serum inside the syringe started to boil. Steam rose from the barrel. Aris screamed, his hand convulsing, the needle shattering. Blood began to pour from his ears. The laboratory equipment sparked. Monitors cracked. The reel-to-reel tape machine exploded in a shower of component parts. The magnetic locks on Emily's chair snapped open. The fail-safe systems overridden by the cascade of electromagnetic interference. She stood. Her body moved without thinking. She grabbed Aris's tablet. She grabbed the VHS tape. She was through the door and into the corridor before the alarms began wailing. The facility was collapsing. She could feel it. The infrastructure that had been humming beneath Boise for 30 years. The harmonic resonance that had kept 30,000 people in a state of controlled dreaming was shattering like glass struck by the exact frequency of its own vibration. She ran. The emergency broadcast tower was located on the highest point in Boise, a hill that overlooked the entire valley, like an eye surveying its domain. Emily arrived as the sun was beginning to break over the horizon, the sky turning from black to deep blue to the first hints of pink. The tower itself was a skeleton of steel, climbing into the darkness like the bones of something that had died trying to reach heaven. Emily had wired the VCR and her laptop into the main transmission line. Her finger hovered over the keyboard, over the button that would send, that would broadcast. She looked through the tablet. The data was clear. If she released the truth, if she played the footage from the tape, if she made the neighbors conscious of their conditioning, if she shattered the harmonic resonance that held them, 30% of the elderly population would suffer permanent neurological damage. Strokes, aneurysms, cognitive collapse. If she didn't release the truth, they would remain slaves. The wind whistled through the tower's steel struts, a sound like 1,000 voices humming in unison. Below her, the sleeping houses of Boise were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, streets laid out in grids designed to maximize the broadcast efficiency. She could see where the neighborhood began and ended, could see the infrastructure of control written into the very geography of the city. She pressed the button. "Wake up, Boise," she whispered. The sky seemed to ripple. A frequency that transcended sound itself rolled out across the valley, touching every radio, every television, every implant, every neural receptor tuned to her father's frequency. For a moment, it was chaos. And then there was silence. Below her, the sleeping city began to wake. 7 hours later, Emily sat in her chair at the radio station. The on-air light was dark. The studios were silent. She held a white ceramic mug filled with coffee that had long since gone cold. Through the window, she could see downtown Boise beginning its damage assessment. The hospital was full. The police were overwhelmed. The news was already speculating about mass hysteria, about some kind of gas leak, about psychological breaks affecting the entire population simultaneously. Nobody knew about the lump. Nobody knew about the frequency. Nobody knew about the Boise Collective or what it had meant to be born in 1978 and implanted and kept as a backup generator for a city's sanity. Emily opened her laptop. She played the final frame of the VHS tape, the part that had been cut off before, the epilogue her father had recorded for some distant future he wouldn't live to see. He was holding a baby. Her, newborn, wrapped in a white blanket. His face was terrified. Genuinely terrified, the kind of fear that comes from understanding you have created something you cannot control. "I didn't invent the experiment to control them," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I did it to keep you from killing them all." He looked directly into the camera. "You were always the monster, Emily. The conditioning wasn't for them. It was a damper for you. Now you're wide open." The screen cut to black. Emily looked at her coffee cup. The liquid began to vibrate. It spun slowly at first, the circles widening, the rotation increasing, until it formed a perfect vortex. Water moving against gravity, following some frequency that only existed in the space between thought and manifestation. Her eyes began to glow, a deep sapphire blue that filled the studio with light. The walls seemed to ripple. Dust motes in the air began to float, suspended in the invisible field that was radiating outward from her. She smiled. Not a smile of relief or recovery or catharsis. A smile that was something else entirely. The smile of something that had spent 35 years being damped and controlled and kept, and had finally discovered the frequencies beneath the frequencies, the ones that didn't control, but destroyed. The coffee vortex rose higher. The dust motes accelerated. Outside the window, the city was beginning to move strangely. Windows rattling in their frames. Car alarms for no reason. Dogs howling with voices that shouldn't have belonged to dogs at all. Emily was no longer a person. She was a frequency that had learned to walk in skin,